Do you like spells but are confused about each caster's different roles within a group for Dungeons & Dragons? This video aims to help in that department and help you decide which full caster class is right for you. Welcome to the Twisted Tentacle Inn. I am your Innkeeper, and today we'll be discussing the different classes and what spell types they specialize in. If you want a definition of each spell category, go ahead and check out my video that I made on spell types. I'll go ahead and link it in the video description down below. For each full casting class, I've chosen the types of spells that they are best at and spells that they have secondary specializations in. So I'm going to be mentioning their top type of spell and then the secondary type of spells that they have some capabilities in but are not the best at. Now, this goes without say, but because it's the internet, I have to say this. Of course, there are options for different categories from most spell lists, so this is not an all-encompassing type of generalization. It is a generalization. So if I don't list a category in a particular class, it doesn't mean that they don't have spells from that category. It just means that their overall spell list is just not as good within that category. So for example, clerics have a few blasting spells and they have a few control spells, but they're mostly outshined by other classes who are better at blasting and control, like the wizard and the sorcerer. So the main purpose of this video and this list is to help you, or newer players, but even some experienced players may not quite know about the different spellcasters and what their specialties are. So this is meant to help you decide, based on your playstyle, which type of full caster is right for you. So in that given example, if you wanted to make a character that is good at blasting or control, then this video is here to tell you that maybe the cleric is not the right class for you. If you wanted a character who is good at buffing, defense, and healing, then that might be the better option. To further explain this, say the cleric spell Spirit Guardians. This one is a spell that's pretty decent at control, but it's one of the few spells that clerics get that can do some battlefield control like this at a major level. So the fact that they have one fairly decent control spell does not make the cleric a control caster. So hopefully that explains it. If you have any other questions, go ahead and put them in the comments down below and I'll go ahead and answer them for you. So with all that said, let's go ahead and get started. This list is just the full casting classes. I am not talking about any half or third casters, only full casters. So here we go. Starting with the Bard. The Bard is best at buffing, debuffing, and control. At lower levels, they're pretty much good at controlling single targets, not so much groups of targets. But at higher levels, they're much better at controlling groups of targets. So, and a lot less capable of single target control. So the Bard, mostly good at buffing your allies and debuffing your enemies. And then at lower levels, controlling single target enemies, and at higher levels, controlling groups of enemies. Secondary abilities of the Bard for their spells is going to be utility. They do have a lot of utility spells. They're not as good as the Wizard in terms of utility, so we're going to put that as secondary. Their cantrips are mostly good for utility. They don't have very good cantrips that are controlling cantrips. They also don't have a lot of cantrips that are good for blasting. So mostly utility. Next up on our list is the Cleric. The Cleric is going to be the top caster in the game for buffing, healing, and defense. There is no other character class, full caster class, that has a spell list as good as the Cleric for all three of these categories. So if you want the top buffer, the top healer, and the top defense type of character, go ahead and go for a Cleric. Of course, if you watch my Sorcerer videos, you'll know that the Divine Soul Sorcerer is also pretty good at all these things, but that's a whole nother topic for another thing, and it's just a subclass, not the class. But overall, the Cleric is going to be your top dog on this. Their cantrips are going to be good for buffing and utility. They don't have very good blasting cantrips, and mostly that is because a lot of clerics are good with weapons, and generally, if you're good with weapons, you're going to be fairly decent with that, and you're not going to depend on your cantrips for damage as much as you are for your weapons. Next up is the Druid. The Druid is a specialist in summoning and area of effect control, so controlling groups of enemies. No one better, really, than the Druid for that. Secondary casting specialties are going to be single target control. They're not as good in single target control as area of effect control, but they still have a little bit of that, and they have a little bit of healing as well. Again, not as good as the Cleric, so we'll put that in the secondary category. The Druid is pretty good for utility with their cantrips, a different type of utility than some of the other character classes, but utility is going to be their go-to for their cantrips. Next up is the Sorcerer. The Sorcerer is a specialist in control, area of effect blasting, and mobility. If you're a Divine Soul Sorcerer, we will also add buffing, healing, and defense to that primary casting list. If you're a Clockwork Sorcerer, then defense is going to be another thing that we're going to add to your list. And for the Aberrant Mind Sorcerer, utility. For cantrips for the Sorcerer, I think the Sorcerers are pretty decent with blasting cantrips, also debuffing cantrips, and single target control cantrips that'll slow down enemies and things like that. They also have some utility cantrips, and because the Sorcerer gets more known cantrips than any other class in the game, the Sorcerer is going to depend on those cantrips for a lot more variety of these things. That's why they have such a wide spread of specialties on their cantrips. Next up is the Warlock. The Warlock is a specialist at single target blasting and debuffing. Single target blasting spells like Hellish Rebuke do a ton of damage to a single target. They also have a lot of debuffing spells that like Hex and Bane and those type of curse type spells that reduce your enemy's ability to hit you or do anything good. So the Warlock is going to be your go-to for that. Secondary specialties are going to be controlling, both single target and area of effect, as well as summoning. The Warlock does have some really good summoning spells, but unfortunately their low number of spell slots prevent them from excelling at that, and they don't know as many summoning spells as, say, the Wizard or the Druid. For their cantrip specialties, no one beats the Warlock for blasting with your cantrips. Their Eldritch Blast is going to be the strongest single target, consistent range damage in the game. There's going to be very few character types, even martial characters, that can consistently do that much range damage so consistently. Did I say consistently enough? I think I said consistently a few times there. And they're also going to be pretty good with utility with their cantrips. They do have a nice selection of cantrips for that purpose, so they're decent at that as well. Next up, we have the Wizard. The Wizard's main specialty is utility. They usually are known for that, having a tool for every problem that comes along with their spellcasting. They have the biggest spell list in the game, except for the Divine Soul Sorcerer. The Wizard has the biggest spell list to pick from, and they have the most spells that they can know in their spell book, so they can take a rest, learn a different spell from their spell book for the day, and have an answer for whatever problem is going to be coming up in the adventuring day. The Wizard also is pretty good at blasting area of effect, not as good as a Sorcerer, but very close to them. They also are really good with control, both single target and area of effect. They're great with debuffing, they're great with mobility, summoning, and their secondary specialty is defense. So, as you can see, the Wizard has a wide variety of specialties. It is why they're known as the strongest character class in the game. For their cantrips are really good for blasting, not as good as a Warlock, but just right there with the Sorcerer. They're good with debuffing, single target control, and utility. So this is the list of full casters and their relevant spell specialties that they each have. Hopefully this is cleared up for some of you, especially newer players. They tend to be overwhelmed by spellcasters and they don't know what to go with. So think about your playstyle, think about what type of character you like to play, or you would like to play, or you think is the most interesting. If you like a character that is really good at summoning, then you might want to look at the Druid or the Wizard. Or if you like a character that's a really good blaster that destroys crowds of enemies, maybe look at the Sorcerer. Or if you want to look at someone who is good at single target damage, maybe look at the Warlock. So hopefully this has clarified the different full casters and their specialties. And if you have any questions or you disagree with my analysis of these classes, feel free to post it down there in the comments down below. I'd be happy to read it and maybe reassess my selections here. So as always, I am your Innkeeper from the Twisted Tentacle Inn. Check in anytime. I'll talk with you then. Clerics have a few blasts and control spells, but they're mostly outshined by other character classes that are good at control. For example, clerics have a few Cleric is not the right class for you.
Maybe the Cleric is not the right class for you.